A History of Religion in 5.5 Objects, Bringing the Spiritual to Its Senses by S Brent Plate. Chapter 2, Stones. I had to forget my idea of nature and learn again that stone is hard, and in so doing found that it is also soft. I'm no longer content to simply make objects instead of placing works upon a stone. I'm drawn to the stone itself. I want to explore the space within and around the stone through a touch that is a brief moment in its life. A long, resting stone is not an object in the landscape, but a deeply ingrained witness to time, a focus of energy for its surroundings. Andy Goldsworthy, Stone. Stones are set, cut, clutched, chiselled and hurled. They ride in our pockets for luck on journeys or climb into our boots, turning travels into travails. 5 small ones in a sling can take down a giant, while one alone might kill 2 birds. They are fingered for protection, worn as rings and necklaces, studied for scientific discovery, used as a tool in capital punishment, and seen as sites of supernatural power. If all that sounds too grand, we might just put them in a box, call them our pet, and sell them by the millions. Stones solicit attention, usually subtly, almost inaudibly. Among the vast number of stones, rocks, pebbles and gravel on the planet Earth and beyond, a handful are occasionally selected, unearthed, transported and repurposed for sacred means, becoming talismans, amulets, altars or memorials. Stones can be manifestations of a divine force, provoking people to pilgrimage over hundreds, even thousands of miles to bask in their presence. Others are ritual objects, helping to keep ceremonies centred and flowing smoothly. Some offer curative powers when touched, healing various maladies. Still others survive as markers of special events from ages past, inviting people to engage memories in a present physical form. They can mark space in the form of boundary markers, delineating mundane distances, as well as precincts of Satan's sacred sites, while specially set stones symbolise microcosmic events like fertility and macrocosmic occurrences like the rhythm of the stars and planets in the sky. Reaching back through time, they are mediums for ancestors long gone. In each case, stones are objects sensed, felt with fingertips, seen with the eyes and felt deeply within. Stones show us the way. This chapter tells a story of stones large and small, ancient and recent, white and black, striated and marbled, smooth and rough, that have found their way into personal and communal sacred settings, engaging with the sensual human body. Somehow, in spite of their assumed nature as hard, cold, heavy, deaf, dumb, blind and unmoving, humans have taken a shine to stones. Stones confront us with object lessons in permanence and change, protection and vulnerability, the stability of home and the instability of the journey, and ultimately the transitions between life and death. Such ambiguities allow insights into the power of religious traditions, institutions, beliefs and practices. 3 stones, 3 faiths. Situated at the 0 point of the Abrahamic monotheistic religions known as Judaism, Christianity and Islam, are stones. Making up more than 1/2 of the world's population today and stretching back for millennia, these 3 religious traditions have spread around the world through missionaries, militaries and media. The peoples of the book have collectively produced libraries upon libraries of learned writings, given birth to modern science, waged wars, mourned and praised the long-gone mythological heroes, and performed simple and elaborate rituals with songs and objects, and they continue to challenge the socio-political structures of the modern and postmodern world. If we head to the start of their globally sprawling bodies, to the nave of their sacred spaces, we find stones. A wise man builds his house upon rock, while a foolish man builds it on sand. After the storms come and go, the house on the rock stands firm. These 3 Western traditions clearly built their houses on rock, and that metaphor can be taken literally. Singular stones help orient the global spaces of the religious traditions, serving mythic and ritual functions as they mark the axis mundi, the cosmic axis, the absolute centre of the world around which all else revolves. In turn, stones have become central as pilgrimage sites of the faiths, standing patiently as throngs of people come to gaze, touch and be in the presence of this hard substance's witness, there at the nexus of existence. At the geographical centre of Judaism is the city of Jerusalem. Within that holy city today are the remains of the temple, first built by King Solomon about 3,000 years ago, destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon around 568 BCE, later rebuilt and destroyed again by the Roman Empire in 70 CE. The stone bricks of its western wall, the Wailing Wall, still remain, as does the foundation stone, thought by many to be the location for the ancient Holy of Holies, the most sacred space for Judaism, and the site where people believe Abraham came close to sacrificing his son Isaac. Jutting up from the earth, the outcropping is nothing spectacular, but it stands its ground. Through a series of concentric circles of increasing sacredness, Israel, Jerusalem, Temple, Holy of Holies, the foundation stone, holds forth as a central spot on all the earth for sacred stability, the navel of the world. Synagogues the world over orient themselves towards Jerusalem and ultimately to this stone site, and observant Jews come to make their requests, pleas and petitions. The mystical Kabbalistic writings found in the Zohar, as well as other Talmudic literature, consider this stone to be the same one through which God created the world by throwing the great stone down to earth. Over the years, the stone has been chiselled, wept upon, hammered, grazed and gazed upon, lasting through crusades and constant political shifts. None of this has stopped the devout from making treacherous journeys to connect with the potency of the stone's presence. The foundation stone became crucial to Islam as well, and today the Muslim-made Dome of the Rock sits atop the ancient outcropping. The dome was erected as a shrine, not a mosque, around 691 CE and marks the legendary place where Muhammad the Prophet underwent his mystical night journey 70 years earlier. Muhammad began the journey while in Mecca when the angel Jibreel brought him the horse-like steed Burak, who took him to Jerusalem. Moving further into sacred space, Muhammad is brought to the site of the ruinous Jewish temple and the furthest mosque of the time, Al-Aqsa on Temple Mount. From that pivotal location, Muhammad ascended into the seven heavens, a journey known as the Miraj, spoke with past prophets, and received instruction about ritual observances for those who would submit to Allah, those who would later be called Muslims. Over the centuries, devout Muslims have made pilgrimages to the shrine, somewhat replicating Muhammad's journey and showing their own piety. The Islamic tradition's reuse of the older Jewish tradition at the stable site of a standing stone shows how the newer revelation to Muhammad did not simply cancel the older Jewish one. According to traditional Islam, it actually continued and updated the previous traditions. The 7th century emergence of Islam as a dominant world power resulted in the replacing of that most sacred location. While evidence suggests that early Muslims prayed facing towards the stone at the centre of Jerusalem, it wasn't long until Islam's cosmic centre shifted to Mecca, and today it is the Kaaba, literally cube, that serves as the axis mundi. Islam has its own concentric circles of increasing sacredness, paralleling Judaism's Mecca, Grand Mosque, Kaaba, and ultimately within the Kaaba lies a particular stone known as the Black Stone, now set at the shrine's southeast corner. There are historical indications that the Black Stone was originally a meteorite, and ancient pre-Islamic people saw its arrival on earth as a sign from heavens, and thus to be exalted. Such meteorite worship is well documented in ancient Greece, as black stones called Betulia stood at the centre of occultic rituals. Islamic traditions and archaeological findings also hint at the Black Stone's origins in Abu Qabays, a mountain near Mecca. Whatever the case of its geological and devotional origins, the reality is that a relatively small stone stands at a central site for the global practice of one of the most influential religions in the history of the world. Within the massive pilgrimages to Mecca during the Hajj and other small pilgrimages, the Black Stone has been greeted through touching and kissing. Today it exists smoothed and broken into pieces from years of devotional caresses. The power of the stone to draw people to it is so strong that a series of silver frames have been placed over it for protection. Over time, these frames themselves are dented, scratched and buffed from millions of fingers touching them. Once the frames fall into disuse, they end up in various cultural collections and serve as sacred objects in their own right. I saw one of these in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace a few years ago and watched people stand reverentially in front of it. Though now, because of museum regulations, the devout are not allowed to touch it. Not far from the western wall and the Dome of the Rock stands the Stone of Anointing within the Christian Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. In the 4th century, the Emperor Constantine had the church built on the site held to be the place of Jesus' death and burial, though the building of today dates from the 12th century. Observant Christians believe the Stone of Anointing to be the site where Jesus' body was prepared for burial. Since at least the 4th century, Christian pilgrims have made their way there to be absolved of sins, but also to be able to say, "I was there," as might be witnessed by the proliferation of images of the stone found across the internet today. Entering the church, one will often catch sight of someone kneeling over the stone, perhaps stretching their arms across it, touching it and kissing it, and thus understand blessings to flow as the once rough surface is smoothed away. Like rivers over rocks, lips and fingertips smooth the stone. In the process, one's soul is smoothed. Fires, earthquakes and invasions have come and gone over the centuries at this site, but the stone remains, or at least it is believed to remain, to be the one and same as that from long ago. There are many other centres of the world, and across Christendom the pious and curious flock to sacred stones. Like Islam, Christianity's centre shifted away from Jerusalem to further and further places on earth, most prominently Rome and Constantinople, but myriad local spots have emerged, grounding religious rituals and mythologies. Every mid-August, for example, hundreds of thousands of people descend on Quillacollo, Bolivia, for the festival surrounding the Virgin of Urcupina, whose mythology is based on the Marian visions of a shepherd girl a few hundred years ago. At one point during the festivals, people venture several kilometres away to Calvary Hill and chisel a stone out of the ground, carrying it home with them in expectation of good fortune, returning the stone the following year with interest. The ritual is based on the activities of the original shepherdess whose vision of the Virgin Mary told her to take a stone home with her. When she did, it turned to silver, thus providing sustenance for her poor family. Meanwhile, in Ireland, from the time of the Protestant Reformation until today, mass rocks have indicated hidden outdoor spaces in which it was relatively safe to meet for Catholic Mass in a Protestant-infused society. These stones serve as ports of call and altars on which priests can conduct Mass. These stones now, well after direct threat, continue to summon people to them, and thousands of Christians every year make pilgrimage to the sites. Stones help hold certain spaces as sacred, literally and figuratively weighing them down. Stones are significant in part because of their relatively stable positions within space. Solomon's, Jesus and Muhammad's physical bodies have left the earth, but millennia later we can feel the same stones they felt. Like religion itself, the stone's lessons are situated between quests and aims, questions and answers. The pilgrim goes to the stones in hopes of healing or a new chance in life, or to set distance from past events. Stones help show the way, imperceptibly urging us onward, even as they become resolutely situated at the end of the way. They are there, waiting at the journey's terminus. Perhaps it is the ubiquity of stones in human life, their pure pragmatic nature, their durability and simultaneous malleability, that has prompted us to bestow certain stones with spiritual power, beyond their use as a weapon or roadside marker. As with bread, incense, crosses and drums, the sometimes sacred status of stones begins with the substance's simplicity and pervasiveness across cultures. This is a curious thing about sacred objects. The type of object is common: pieces of bread, sticks that burn, a rock, while some specimens of the type are taken to be holy. Or more specifically, the common objects become holy when placed within a unique time and place, and humans find power within them. In the early 20th century, French sociologist Émile Durkheim characterised religious life and thought as involving a series of distinctions between the sacred and the profane. While anything can be sacred, Durkheim suggests, the sanctity of a thing is due to the collective sentiment of which it is the object. This is not to say all things are sacred, but that anything can be. As with real estate, it's all location, location, location. The philosopher Nelson Goodman says something similar. Stones are normally no work of art while in the driveway, but may be so when on display in an art museum. What matters is the location of an object within a particular social setting, the ways it is meaningful to groups of people for specific purposes. In many times and places around the world, groups of humans have come to collectively believe that this stone, this one right here in front of us, is given by the gods, is provided as a token, and should be set up as a centrepiece in a garden, an altar, or a device for the keeping of collective memories. While I tend to agree with the social dimensions of Durkheim's analysis, objects can also gain a kind of sacred power within more individualised settings and encounters. The top of my 7-year-old daughter's dresser contains one plastic watch given to her by a favourite aunt, one Captain Jack Sparrow Lego figure, one wooden die from a board game, and a baseball-sized stone. Like any good altar, it's a hodgepodge of ingredients that heeds nothing to consistency in style, material or form. Instead, it's a collection of materials brought together in a single location and unified through the intentions, however unconscious, of a collector such as my daughter. The objects are set there and not down in her toy box or left under the bed because they stand out for her from her other toys and games. The stone in the collection was found on the beach in San Diego on the last day we vacationed there a few years ago. My daughter had been having a good time that day, splashing through the shallows, chasing seagulls, digging tunnels in the sand and searching for shells and stones. At the end of the day, she didn't want to leave, and it being our last day of holiday, she somehow, almost instinctively, had this notion that she needed to bring something with her. If she couldn't stay, then part of that environment must come along. My reason to please about it being too big, too heavy, too something to fit into baggage on the airplane back to New York amounted to little. Its current situation in her room evidences its bi-coastal journey. Individuals as well as communities gather objects, place them in one location, and allow those objects to hold a significant sacred place in their lives. Makes no difference whether these objects belong together in accord with some ancient manual of myths and rituals or aesthetic school of thought, nor has it ever mattered much. An online search for contemporary images of personal altars reveals an arresting array of the ways people continue to bring objects, human-made as well as naturally found, into a new space, repurposing the profane for sacred ends. Altars reflect personal tastes, even as the social mores and cultural products of the individual's environment are profoundly influential. While altars can include ephemeral objects, they continually, the world over, incorporate solid substances, things that will last and remind the devotee of places and times and people long gone. And I suspect many who are reading this have at one time pocketed a stone and carried it from its original setting to a specific shelf, desk or table, often across great distances. The taking of stones from certain locations may seem to be a benign activity, but it is not always. Sometimes it is theft, as a controversy in Central Australia shows. Again, location matters. The iconic natural landmark called Uluru, Ayers Rock, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and part of the Uluru Kata Tjuta National Park, which sees 500,000 tourists each year. The rock formation itself is considered sacred by the Anangu people, who esteem it in their mythologies, and the monolith has long been a place for ritual performance. Because it is understood as a sacred site full of power, tourists have made a habit of taking sand or stones from the park, illegally bringing them back home with them, hoping to garner some blessing from the place. In 1998, a German-based company even sold Uluru stones for hundreds of dollars, calling the stones Children of Uluru, until a group of Anangu stated their objections and the company ceased their selling. Another report indicates that a genuine piece of Ayers rock was advertised on eBay in 2005 with a bid starting at $50. In the midst of these stone thefts, curious reports have emerged, as many who have taken them have complained about bad luck and misfortune after returning home, marriage troubles, family illnesses, even deaths. So now, over the past 2 decades, the stones have been consistently returned by post to the Australian National Park from all over the world. Some people write accompanying letters apologising for taking the sacred objects. Others seem to believe that returning the rocks will reverse their bad fortune. The returned objects have become known in the park as sorry rocks. Contrary to the sorry rocks of Uluru, the stone on display in my daughter's room is just a chunk off some bulkhead. It is not beautiful, nor is it sacred by any traditional definition. But it has a heft to it. It is solid, like it can carry the weight of memories of a place and time across a continent. I should perhaps be forgiven in extending the definition of stone to include a hunk of rough gravelled concrete found on a beach and winding up on my daughter's stack of drawers. Yet, if gravel concrete is made by human means, compressing various types of mined and milled rock together, rock itself is nature's equivalent. All rock, whether sedimentary, igneous or metamorphic, is formed from other types of rock, forced together by means volcanic, geological and catastrophic. As solid and unchanging as natural rock seems, it is itself in a constant state of flux. The point is to suggest that stones are themselves on a journey, even when they seem stable. They are formed, reformed and transformed over long periods. They are washed smooth by a river through the years, while our fingertips feel erosion's polished results. We might even be provoked from time to stop and contemplate the paradoxical effects of as supple a substance as water on the solid stuff of stone. Or we might gaze at a banded stone, the beauty of a rainbow of colours striped together, and be astonished by the tremendous geological forces necessary to press various minerals together in so permanent a way. The stones of Jerusalem and Mecca, Uluru and my daughter's dresser each demonstrate one key aspect of the appeal of stones. The stone's voyage is felt and seen by our sensual bodies. The stone's journey meets the human journey, provoking memories, contemplation, a respect for the immense energies at work in the universe, all contained in a small object that can be tossed aside, skipped across the surface of still water with an ever so supple wrist, set up along the trail, used as a tool, or placed in an altar setting. As poet William Blake once famously suggested, to see a world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. In such sensual experiences with objects, the macrocosmic wonders of the world connect to the microcosmos that is our sensing body. The journey of one's body is mirrored in the body of the other. The Italian poet Petrarch once said, "I do not know whence its origin, but I do know that innate desire to see new places and to change one's home. There is something truly pleasant, though demanding, along this curiosity for wandering through different regions." Petrarch's intuition about travel seems to have been proven correct through history, leading contemporary biologist John Janavay to suggest pilgrimages seem to be almost instinctive, or at least derived from behaviours now so ingrained in our species that it's difficult to distinguish between genetics and social origins. Religious traditions have worked with this restless facet of human life and developed simple and extensive pilgrimage rituals. In the midst of these, we find stones, aiding travellers in the midst of encounters in and with the unknown. They are protective devices to ward off evil spirits and unwanted strangers, markers to describe distance to and from a sacred site, or piles that testify to those who have gone before. In the Detroit Metro Airport stands a beautiful black granite water fountain created by WT Design, the same group who created the Bellagio fountains in Las Vegas and remade the Lincoln Center fountains in New York City. The fountain is a wonderful spectacle, and watching it helps pass the time. Yet on a recent layover, my attention was drawn elsewhere. Near the fountain are several trees in large containers. In these containers are smooth stones covering the potted dirt. It's not clear who started the process, but people have begun to write on the stones, offering their names and the places they're travelling to or from in multiple languages, and often including visual symbols like hearts and peace signs. There are no instructions nearby telling people to leave their contribution. Rather, it seems to have started on an impulse that was then followed somewhat instinctively by others. I spoke with the airport's media relations office, and they told me that Northwest Airlines initially felt this was like graffiti and worked hard to eliminate the marked up stones. Over time, the stone writings returned, and the airlines gave up trying to get rid of them. This improvised ritual is remarkable for what it tells us about the nature of stones and how they connect to humans, and something about the nature of humans, particularly in the midst of a journey. I suspect most of the people who have made their contributions to the stone collection in the Detroit airport do not know much about the ancient Greek myth of Hermes, the messenger, for the Greek gods and protector of travellers, like a proto-saint Christopher. Scholars have suggested that Hermes took his name from the root herm, which in ancient times signified a stone heap, and was later used as the name for a sacred boundary marker or roadside altar, often a sculpted bust upon a pillar. The ancient Greeks often interacted with stones, carving into them or leaving them in a semi-natural state as protective devices, but also as pragmatic markers of distance along roads and borders. Magic and maths have not always been so far apart. A herm was also a talisman, placed at borders and sacred spots to protect a local group from any strangers they might encounter there. The heaps offered protection as people travelled, something perhaps intuited by modern airline travellers, and not dissimilar to the Hindu use of images of Ganesha, stone or other, or the Jewish use of mezuzah. Herms were also set outside one's house to offer luck and blessings to guests who entered. While the Detroit airport stones are a recent phenomenon, they unwittingly continue ancient traditions and practices, such as the global phenomenon of creating cairns. From the Gaelic, a cairn is simply a pile of rocks. Sometimes they have religious connotations, sometimes not. Crucial here is the fact that a cairn is made up of more than one stone, and they indicate some sort of human expression, somewhere between nature and culture, usually situated in the realm of ritual. Like the airport stones, cairns connect the traveller to those who have gone before and will come after. And like the airport stones, cairns become repositories for stories. Cairns are civilised markers within the wild, among the chaos of unknown threatening lands, whether airport terminal or mountain pass. They become especially critical in more desolate climates, when snow has covered trails or where pathways are at risk of being covered or washed away. The significance of the pile of stones depends on its placement on who is looking and listening. Cairns and other collections of stones have much to tell us, but we have to know how to listen. In Mongolia, atop mountain passes and hills, stand large cairns called ovu, literally a heap, made up of stones, wood, bones and other materials. The Mongols are traditionally nomadic and shamanistic, and the worship of certain mountains is not uncommon. Genghis Khan himself was a worshipper of Birken Mountain. The shape of an ovu mimics a mountain and can be found in high elevations, becoming a key site for rituals. Some ceremonies take place near the heaps and others at the base of the mountain on which they stand. In older times, ovu were typically shrines dedicated to the local Mongol deities, Nibda, Shibdag or Lus, the Dragon King. In the shamanistic religious environment, it is also believed that certain shamans can control nature, causing rain, wind, and so forth through engagement with a sacred stone called a jada. Tibetan Buddhism eventually came to dramatically influence Mongol culture, triggering a number of changes in traditional rituals and myths. Yet, as with most new religious movements, the old is adapted and reincorporated into the new. In the older traditions, animal sacrifices were often made, and the ovu were in part composed of animal bones. In the newer renditions, Buddhist prayer flags began to be placed within the ovu, while Tibetan prayers and scriptures were written directly on the stones. And instead of the shamanistic deities being worshipped at the ovu sites, devotion shifted to various Buddhist lamas. From one religion to the next, over centuries of rituals and rain, piles of stones remain. Living now in an age of technological planned obsolescence, Detroit airline passengers evidence a desire for that which lasts, something that makes a mark on the future, communicates not in the ephemerality of texts and tweets and talks, but in the hard-lasting language of stones. They mark our presence in a physical place for people and ages to come. Facebook and Twitter accounts are filled with updates on people in transition, and yet in a real sense, humans have been checking in and sending status updates for millennia. Stones never become obsolete as social media. Two sculptors offer further meditative forays into the human relationship with stone, and their works allow us to examine the distinction between nature and culture. The artists are not creating art for religious purposes, an object set in a place of worship within a specific religious tradition for a specific ritual outcome, but their work allows us to think about how art functions religiously. Their art is analogous to religious objects, borrowing similar principles, symbols and compositions, and allows some insights into how and why religious traditions have used stones in the way that they have for so many eons. Isamu Noguchi grew up between Japan and the United States, trained as a modern artist in the Euro-American mode, but later undertook a study of Japanese gardens, particularly their Zen Buddhist aesthetic styles. He saw a parallel aim in emerging modern artistic sensibilities and the ancient tradition of garden making in Japan. Both seek a heightened awareness of one's environment, a distillation of the cosmos, and a conscious disturbance of the natural realm. Through these two contrasting influences, Noguchi eventually settled on stone as his primary medium, various types of granite, basalt and marble quarried around the world. In his unique hybrid way, Noguchi took the Japanese garden art of stone setting and modified it by etching and cutting and smoothing parts of stone. His 1971 piece, To Intrude on Nature's Way, condenses many of Noguchi's artistic tendencies. Here, the basalt monolith is left natural in places, cleaned of clinging dirt, but otherwise unaltered from its found state. But Noguchi chisels it into it at other points, intruding on nature's own artistic processes. The work remains in limbo, somewhere between the natural and the artistic, allowing viewers to think about what art does that is different from, but also similar to nature. Natural rock becomes sculptural artifact, made meaningful within an artistic location. The human hand, using tools, transforms the object into something other than it was in nature. Nature is brought into culture. In so doing, the artist works in a way parallel to the cultivating artistic work of religious traditions. Similarly, the contemporary British artist Andy Goldsworthy works with all manner of matter, exploring the relations between stone and time, nature and culture. His almost animistic sculptures are typically temporary, as he uses ephemeral substances like twigs, leaves, snow and mud. Or he uses stone, but without the settings of mortar, so even these structures eventually fall apart. Many of his works are set far from any urban museum environment, and the only lasting artwork is simply a photograph taken before his sculptures return to their natural setting. A pile of rocks is left on a beach. The coming high tide submerges and disassembles the heap, tossing the stones through ebbs and flows. Goldsworthy gets a feel for a place and proceeds with an intervention that both alters nature and respects it. He speaks of particular stones that proffer some radiating anime, some soul and intention, witnessing to the past in this time and in this place. And he claims a rock is not independent of its surroundings. The way it sits tells how it came to be there. The energy and space around a rock are as important as the energy and space within. When I touch a rock, I'm touching and working the space around it. Goldsworthy's work is striking, often leaving viewers mesmerised by the simplicity that good art can take. Leaves, stones, sticks, water, mud, snow, all fleeting, yet powerful while they exist. Reflecting on such work, we might scratch our heads and realise this stuff, this matter, these sticks and stones might be alive. There is anime, soul, and intention in these objects. Taking Noguchi's and Goldsworthy's cues, it is possible to productively rethink a difference between stone and rock. While the terms are often used interchangeably in everyday English, I tend toward the geological understanding that rock is a natural material. In fact, little else on earth is so thoroughly natural. Rocks become stones when humans interact with them and use them in cultural settings, often after smaller chips have fallen off the old block. Under the artistic caress of Noguchi and Goldsworthy, stones become symbolic of human engagement with nature. Unlike rock, a stone stands between nature and culture, at once harkening back to whence it came and forward to where it may become further entrenched in human affairs. Thus, to give a working definition, stones are humanly used pieces of rock, just as the stones use us. As such, the Stone Age was given its name because humans used stones as tools. It wasn't the Rock Age, even though, scientifically speaking, the substance used was indeed rock. A pivotal era in history, the Stone Age lasted more than 3 million years and spanned the difference between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens. During this time, modern humans emerged out of the Rift Valley of East Africa, as rocks were fashioned into stone axes, blades, chisels, knives, awls and scrapers used to hone, dig, pierce, chop, cut, crack and kill. Along with the use of handheld, shaped stones, this era gives the earliest evidence we have today of the beginnings of art, social organisation into settled communities, the cultivation of plants, and ultimately religion. The discovery in the 1960s of the great stone rings of Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey evidenced ritual gatherings, aesthetic creations, and the use of stone more than 11,000 years ago. Dating 6,000 years before Stonehenge and 7,000 years before the stone structure known as the Great Pyramid of Giza, this is the place of the oldest known temple on Earth. While we are still years and perhaps decades from firm conclusions about this archaeological find, one current theory suggests that Göbekli Tepe supports the presence of an organised religious site in the midst of foragers. In other words, as Klaus Schmidt, the lead archaeologist at the site, speculates, religious ritual, sacred space, and even the practice of pilgrimage preceded the rise of agriculture and civilization, as we tend to define it. This places organised religion at an earlier point in evolutionary history than previously believed. Modern humans do not exist apart from stone, and religion itself is built upon such rock. The differences between rock and stone is the difference between nature and culture, which is also to say stones speak to the differences and connections between nature and religion. The difference lies in technology, as noted in this book's introductory chapter. A stone axe and a stone monolith standing in an art museum or archaeological dig are products of technology, as are drums and bread. They may not take batteries to operate, but they are technological just the same. The stone does not even need to be physically altered, but simply put to use in some humanly meaningful, creative way. Sen no Rikyu was the greatest designer of Japanese tea gardens and ceremonies in the 16th century, and his creative impact is still felt today. He received Zen training at the Daitoko Temple in Kyoto, and his lasting influence on the architecture of the tea house and gardens is due to the aesthetics produced from a Zen sensibility. The graceful yet rigid actions of the traditional tea ceremony find roots in the Buddhist practice of mindfulness, one step of the Eightfold Path that Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, taught millennia ago. Legend has it that drinking tea, usually green and thus caffeinated, developed as monks spent long periods of time in meditation and needed something to keep them awake, though it also had medicinal uses, as contemporary dietitians are now realising. With deliberate and careful attention to every minor activity in the preparing of tea for guests, Rikyū suggested the ritual provides for harmony, respect, purity and tranquillity. Drinking tea is not so much the goal of the ceremony as it is one step along the way. The term used is chado, literally the way of tea. Rikyū was influential in part because he redefined the implements used. Cups, pots and whisks were selected for their wabi, or rustic quality, giving the assurance and appearance of being well used, even if recently made, and of being accessible to people of various means, and not simply the fancy gold-plated utensils of the upper classes. He also designed the architecture and landscape of the tea house, a term that includes not merely the building but also the surrounding gardens and, crucially, the roji path leading up to it. The short walk from street to tea house, through use of winding walkways, carefully selected and pruned foliage, becomes a compressed pilgrimage, a sacred journey. Entering the tea garden is a journey into a sacred space. Among other innovations attributed to Rikyū is the use of a sekimori ishi, a barrier stone, a small stone typically placed on top of a larger stepping stones. The stone directs foot traffic and even can indicate that the tea house is closed. If the roji forks and the visitor is unsure which way to go, a sekimori ishi will direct the way by barring one path. No fortified gate or imposing no trespassing signs are needed, just a small stone tied up with a length of rope, looking like a geological birthday present. One key difficulty in setting this up, for those taking the aesthetic implications of the tea house and ceremony seriously, is finding just the right stone. Not anyone will do. Preference is for a flat-bottomed stone with a nice rounded top, large enough to be noticed but small enough to be carried around. Anyone could easily step over or around a sekimori ishi, but for those who understand the symbol, the message is clear. It is one of those light, whimsical touches that made Rikyū so famous. Other stones that serve as barriers in Japanese culture carry more gravity. After being ignored and often hidden for centuries, several hundred tsunami stones became apparent after the devastating earthquake and tsunami hit northern Japan in April 2011. Placed on slopes safely above rising ocean waters, the stones were carved with warnings not to build below this level, or they would provide lists of previous death tolls or serve as markers for mass graves. Itoko Kitari, a specialist in the history of natural disasters at Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto, is quoted in the New York Times. The tsunami stones are warnings across generations, telling descendants to avoid the same suffering of their ancestors. These are messages from those who have gone before, offering protective warnings and telling stories through the medium of stone. The Pulitzer Prize winning author Annie Dillard tells a quirky story about a reclusive neighbour named Larry who keeps a stone on his shelf, a palm-sized oval beach cobble whose dark grey is cut by a band of white which runs around and presumably through it. The neighbour is ritualistically teaching the stone to talk. No one is sure how he's going about it, but Dillard speculates that this strange activity is really about the need to listen, to hear silence. It takes practice. The silence is all there is, Dillard writes. It is God's brooding over the face of the waters. Yet the reverse activity can also be true. Stone teaches us to talk. Stones are metaphorically meaningful in human life, since almost everyone at some point has encountered pebbles, stones, rocks, cliffs, or rocky mountains. More to the religious point, the metaphorical weight of rock and stone finds its way through sacred scriptures. To give one initial solid example, the primal naturalness of rock and stone is so insistent that it becomes one key way to speak about God and God's nature in the Hebrew Bible. God is the rock of Israel, my rock and my fortress, the rock of your refuge, an everlasting rock. Or as God queries, is there a God beside me? There is no rock, I know not any. This sense of solidity and permanence, this connection with the raw materials of the God-made earth, makes rock a key piece of divine language. In fact, the Hebrew Bible makes dozens of references to God as a rock, and no more than a handful to God as Father. How much difference would the Christian creed be if it reflected the biblical usage? I believe in God, the Rock Almighty. Language is deeply material, and the rhetorical usage of rock and stone stems from their real physical nature. They are, to give the three simplest descriptions, solid, hard, and heavy. These attributes give way to others, such as permanent, unchanging, and foundational. Expressions like free as a rock, the stone-like softness, or light as a stone simply don't make sense. But metaphors aside, surely stones are inert, aren't they? They lack animation, a soul that gives them life. After all, they just lie there until someone picks them up, or they roll with no direction home, as Bob Dylan had it. We use them metaphorically to indicate inactivity and disability, stone blind, stone deaf, still as a stone, or as the heavy metal band Metallica grinds out an answer to the question of what has happened to one's wasted life. Stone dead forever, that's right. Building on their physical existence as objects sensed primarily through touch and vision, myths and rituals from around the world have continued to speak of stones and their life and death functions within human cultures. In Greek mythology, Niobe turned to stone after the loss of her children, crying rivers of tears. In the Lakota traditions, the story is told of a woman who turned to stone after her husband and village abandoned her. The remaining woman stone was in turn considered sacred and was carried with the repentant community as they travelled. Conversely, in Maori traditions, the deity Rakahore is a personified form of stone who reproduces various stones and rocks across land and sea. And Hawaiian cultures tell stories of stones having sex. Solid rocks are male, porous rocks are female, producing smaller pebbles. Stones, like so many religious symbols, can mean one thing and also the opposite. They stand at the point of death, but also produce life. The Christian New Testament at first might seem to follow the soulless, directionless stone metaphor. Jesus' sermons are littered with references to them as inert objects acted upon by the will of God. The itinerant preacher of the Gospels speaks of God's power as able from these stones to raise up children. He queries what kind of person would give up their son to a stone, would give their son a stone rather than bread, or he notes that if his own disciples did not praise God, the very stones would cry out. Even the devil knows the power of God to turn stones into bread, and so tempts the proclaimed Son of God to do likewise. In each instance, stones are lifeless nature, standing in contrast to some animating life force. To prove the potency of God, the stone must be impotent. Such lifeless language dovetails with the many biblical accounts of capital punishment, death by stoning, a brutal form of execution by torture as stones break bones and pelted bodies collapse after repeated blows. Death comes slowly. Throughout Jewish, Christian and Islamic scriptures are accounts of stonings and warnings not to behave in particular ways because the penalty is death. To be clear, the Quran does not mention stoning, though several hadith do. One man is found gathering sticks on the Sabbath day, and all the congregation brought him outside the camp and stoned him to death with stones, as the Lord commanded Moses. The Bible is full of many such accounts that associate stones not just with lifeless matter, but also with the taking of life. Many of the early Christian martyrs, including Saints Stephen and Timothy, were killed by stoning, stoned to death, stoned dead. One more famous case involving laws of stoning is found in the Gospel of John while Jesus is teaching at the temple in Jerusalem. Interrupted by a group of people who bring in a woman accused of adultery, the Pharisees recite the law to Jesus. Moses commanded that punishment for such actions is stoning. They ask Jesus' opinion on the matter. Jesus, who was often called rabbi and knew the law well, did something unexpected. He turned the tables and indicted everyone by claiming, "He who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." Through such descriptive retellings, stones are connected with judgments, taking on connotations of guilt and innocence, functioning within the sacred stories as symbols and even agents regarding matters of life and death. All this aids in the lead-up to the Passion story, the narrative of the death and resurrection of Jesus. After some close calls with groups of upset people ready to kill him, sometimes with stones in hand, Jesus is eventually executed on a cross, in the Roman manner of capital punishment. After his death and deposition from the cross, he is taken to a tomb and embalmed on the stone of anointing. The Gospels then tell of a great stone rolled across the entrance to the tomb and a seal set on the tomb with a guard standing by. In each of the 4 Gospel accounts, the stone is miraculously moved away from the tomb entrance, sometimes during the night. When the women come to visit on Sunday morning, they're startled by the empty tomb with the stone rolled away. The rolled stone becomes the first symbol of the resurrected Jesus, the triumph over the death that stands at the heart of Christianity. A fragment of this is called the Angel Stone and stands within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, not far from the Anointing Stone. If the Christian scriptures tell of Jesus being tempted by the devil to turn stones into bread, the Islamic tradition also connects devilish temptation and stonings with a nice twist. One key rite enacted as part of the Hajj, the great pilgrimage to Mecca, is the stoning of the devil. 3 stone pillars, Jamarat, stand in the city of Mina, a few kilometres east of the Masjid al-Haram, the Grand Mosque of Mecca. In the midst of multiple rituals, including the wearing of special white garments, Ihram, praying on Mount Arafat, running between 2 hills, drinking water from the well of Zamzam, sacrificing an animal and circumambulating the Kaaba, pilgrims throw stones at the Jamarat. As numbers of pilgrims have increased, several million have performed the Hajj in recent years. The pillars have also grown due to the fact that stray pebbles thrown by other pilgrims were accidentally hitting people across the way. Old images of the Jamarat show them to be small pillars about 2 metres high. In 2006, the pillars were rebuilt into great walls with bridges towering around them, enabling the millions of pilgrims to pass by and throw stones from upper to lower levels. Each of the smaller rituals that comprise the Hajj stem from ancient stories, connecting the contemporaries to the original Hajj made by Abraham and also to the critical figures of Hagar, Ishmael and Muhammad. The relevant story about stoning the devil for the Hajjis, as those who complete the Hajj are called, goes back to Abraham, the great patriarch of the Israelites and Arabs and ancestor of Muhammad. The Quran tells us how Abraham was commanded by Allah to sacrifice his son Ishmael in a way parallel to the Hebrew scripture account of Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac. Later traditions tell us a fuller account and state that along the way, Abraham was tempted 3 times by the devil not to sacrifice his son and thus to disobey Allah's commands. Ever available in times of need, the angel Jibreel fortifies Abraham's commitment and tells him to take stones and pelt him. Contemporary Hajjis mimic the ancient story by pelting the symbolic pillars with stones. In so doing, they are repelling the devil and his temptations and showing their own resolve and faithfulness. The mythical, metaphorical use of stones, whether in words or in the hand, is complex. On one hand, they are inert objects, a mere conduit to prove power. On the other hand, they begin to speak as they're bound up with activities of temptation and judgment, guarding and killing, death and resurrection. Taking another look at the New Testament conversation about stones, we find their active role as a prime building material. In the midst of telling parables, Jesus quotes from the Psalms, "The very stone which the builders rejected has become the head of the corner." Jesus mentions the cornerstone, at once rejected but then used as himself. And later writings in the New Testament make this claim more boldly, as Jesus Christ is the cornerstone of the temple of God for the people of God. When constructing a new church, post office, synagogue, bank, temple, house or mosque, the cornerstone is the first material set in the foundation, and all other materials are based on this primary stone. Its placement becomes crucial to the orientation, height and balance of the rest of the building. If the cornerstone is off kilter, the whole building will be. But to be on kilter in a religious building also entails a spiritual sense of balance, some perfectly perpendicular metaphysics. Because cornerstones are so fundamental to a building, rituals often accompany their setting. Animals are sacrificed, dignitaries, secular and religious, perform gestures, prayers are spoken, and music is played. Meanwhile, crowds of people take part in these foundational moments, directing their sacred energies toward raising the building. Varieties of similar rituals are evidenced across the world at many times and places and across religious traditions. The Roman Catholic Church has a rite dating back at least a half millennium, and probably earlier, titled Of the Blessing and Laying of the Foundation Stone for the Building of a Church. In the rite, a bishop sprinkles holy water on the foundation stone, engraves crosses on each side of the stone, and recites prayers and Bible verses in the presence of a group of congregants. In some accounts, money is also thrown into the foundations or laid on the cornerstone, though that is not part of the official liturgies. The Catholic rituals, like many in the Christian Church, have ancient pagan roots. The Christian rite takes after a pagan ceremony dedicating the Roman temple of Jupiter just after the time of Jesus. Accounts of this ceremony tell how the great stone at the foundation of the temple was washed with lustral water and dragged into place by a collective. Meanwhile, the oldest known cornerstone ceremonies go back thousands of years before Jesus to the times of the ancient kingdoms of Akkad and Egypt. For almost as long as structures have been built, people have ritualistically participated in placing the first stone, the cornerstone. In extreme cases, humans have been sacrificed at the foundations of the building. The 19th century German poet and satirist Heinrich Heine tells of how in the Middle Ages the opinion prevailed that when any building was to be erected, something living must be killed in the blood of which the foundation had to be laid, by which process the building would be secured from falling. And Jacob Grimm's Germanic mythology relates how it was often thought necessary to build living animals, even men, into the foundations on which an edifice was raised, to induce the earth to bear the burden laid on it. In the New Testament, Jesus proves himself the punster, playing on words and perhaps a sense of cornerstone history, as he gives a nod to one of his followers, Simon. Jesus renames him Peter, saying, "And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." In Greek, Peter is Petros, while the term for rock used here is Petra. "I tell you, you are Petros, and on this Petra I will build my church." Rhetorically, following Jesus' earlier parable of the wise man who builds his house upon a rock, as opposed to the foolish man who built his house on sand, and winds and rains knock it down. Peter is a solid rock that supplies the foundations for the house come church. In the Roman Catholic tradition, Peter is seen as the first pope, who helps to establish the Christian church, the rock that is firm, solid, able to hold up large structures over the centuries. Scholars debate whether this same Peter, the disciple of Jesus, actually wrote the biblical books that bear his name. But this much is true. The author of 1 Peter picks up right away on the stone and rock metaphors that Jesus provides in the Gospels. Chapter 2 of that book strings together a series of scripture verses pointing to Jesus as a living stone, and how each follower might themselves too become such a stone, being built into a spiritual house. Peter's language re-embodies Jesus' earlier language. Stones are living, and the house built from them is spiritual. The church has its foundation on rock. So does religious discourse. Upon this rock, sacred language will be built. As I write this, it is summertime here in central New York, an all too short period when we rush outside to soak up as much sun and green as we can before winter sets in again. This also entails a scramble to get things planted, hoping for a bounty of homegrown tomatoes, beans, corn and other tasty veggies. During the season, the local libraries appeal to our literary green thumbs, prominently displaying their collections on gardening. The garden manuals, as one would expect, describe the growing rate and height, hardiness, uses and arrangements of plant materials. Trees, perennials, annuals, grass, vegetables and herbs. Maybe some vines. Every once in a while, the book might explain how to make a trellis or pathway. Yet one of the oldest surviving garden manuals in the history of the world begins by telling us that gardening is the art of setting stones. This is the first line of the 11th century treatise, Sakuteki, Records of Garden Making, attributed to a minor court official during Japan's Heian period, 794 to 1185. During the Muromachi era, 300 years later, another manual, Sensui Narabi ni Yagzo no Zu, Illustrations for Designing Mountain, Water and Hillside Field Landscapes, appeared. As with any good garden manual, the two records provide instruction on arrangement and design, how to work with particular materials and the development of a humanly cultivated space in conjunction with natural surroundings. What is striking to modern Western sensibilities is the importance placed on stones in the midst of it all. From the first line of the Sakuteki through the end of the Sensui, the manuals offer training in stone use and arrangement, instruction on how to complement certain stones with other materials, and elements of the natural world, as well as strategies for connecting stones to the humans who participate in the garden. The Sakutiki explains the cornerstone like importance of beginning with a particularly splendid stone, and set it as the main stone. Then, following the request for the first stone, sets others accordingly. Note how the first stone requests other stones. The Senzui even sets out a vocabulary of names for the shapes of the garden stones. For example, the Furoseki, never-aging rock, Mitsuchi-ishi, water-striking rock, Mangoseki, rock of 10,000 aeons, Kamoishi, duck's abode rock, or the Shuseki, rock of perfect beauty. Records show that from the Heian period, and especially into the Kamakura period, 1185 to 1333, when Zen Buddhism was widespread through the islands, the work of priests and gardener was often inseparable. The name for this occupation was Ishitatiso, or stone-setting priests, a term that continued on in the Zen tradition far into the Muromachi period. Stones have qualities, personas and characteristics, and if the human gardener is attentive enough, he might be able to decipher these and set them properly. Very few places in the world, save China, cherish, use, and in many cases deify stones, as in Japan. Japanese gardens are rife with indications of the potency, vitality, and cosmic significance of stones as they merge ancient Shinto practices and beliefs with Buddhism. Buddhism itself came from India, filtered through Chinese religious, aesthetic, and philosophical attitudes, including Taoism and Confucianism, before arriving in Japan in the 6th century. Japanese religious traditions today continue to mix and merge each of these in unique ways, and the gardens provide a palimpsest, an archaeological layering of religious and cultural histories. Within the indigenous traditions of Shinto, otherwise known as the Way of the Kami, are many gods and goddesses. Similar to other polytheistic and animistic traditions, these include spirits of the ancestors who have died and passed on, deities of storms, fire, the sun and the sea, gods of longevity and of foods like rice, and patrons of vocations such as swordsmiths, musicians and peddlers. The classic 8th century text Kojiki states that there are 8 million kami, which is another way to say the number is infinite. And the other 8th century classic chronicle, Nihongi, chronicles the ancient age of the kami, a time when trees and grasses had the power of speech. The kami also inhabit rocks and stones, not unrelated to the Hawaiian and Maori stories noted above. Accounts of Shinto mythologies involve beliefs and narratives about stones that produce offspring, grow and move on their own accord. Particular rock outcroppings are seen as residencies of the deities and are known as iwakuro. Some accounts suggest that people saw something in a particular natural arrangement and realised the spirits were there, while other accounts describe an unusual setting and use it as a place to set up rituals to invoke the kami. As a result, various Shinto shrines exist across Japan, built upon more ancient geologically natural manifestations of the kami, like trees and hills and rock. Very often, too, a local shrine will recreate the sacred presence of nature on a smaller, more human scale. The natural setting might be a mountain, e.g. Mount Fuji, standing tall and ever-present over the valleys and the plains below. The mountain, in turn, could be suggested by an iwasaka, god boundary, made of upright stones or a circle of horizontal stones around a central stone, which thereby demarcates a sacred boundary. The oldest existing Shinto shrine in Kyoto is the Kanegama Shrine and is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Its origins derive from the worship of the Daito Kamowaki Ikazuchi no Kami atop the sacred mountain of Koyama, 2 kilometres from the present shrine. Originally, people journeyed up to the mountain, but the devout were eventually able to experience down in Kyoto the sacred presence of the kami, now enshrined in the Kamigami grounds near town. The sacred power was transported down to the valley, and standing at Kamigamo's entrance, twin cone-shaped tatsuna symbolise Mount Koyama. The 1.5 metre high mounds are formed from loose gravel. Because there are 2, the mounds are also meant to invoke the binary forces of yin and yang, and thus create a harmonious experience through the shrine. And because a single sprig of pine branch is usually stuck at the pinnacle, they also can represent the trees that were used as part of sacrifices in the ceremonies. As with many dimensions of Japanese gardens and shrines, there is no single symbolic meaning. Within Kamigamo's torii gates stands the Ganyo, the sacred rock highlighted during the annual Ayo Hollyhock Festival. During this time, the chief priest kneels before the stone to receive a blessing, since the chief kami resides in that very stone during the festival period. Shinto traditions continue to place importance on the kami that reside in natural objects like stones, eventually influencing the later Buddhist gardens. As Buddhist practices and ideas began to grow across Japan, a repurposing of the old symbols took place. The stones and shrines to the deities in nature did not disappear, but changed forms to meet new ways of seeing and being. One of the more remarkable developments in gardening involved the creation of dry stone gardens. In the earlier gardens, water was the dominant element in the form of ponds, streams, and waterfalls. These gardens are called sansui, literally mountain water, and derive much of their compositional form from Chinese landscape painting. Under the aesthetic austerity of Zen, stone and rock replaced water elements, generating an impression of ponds, streams, and waterfalls in the perception of viewers. These are known as kari sansui, dry mountain water gardens, and are thought to have originated with the work of the 4th century Rinzai Zen monk and designer Muso Soseki. Both garden varieties, dry and wet, and other genres such as the tea garden, stroll garden, and imperial garden continue to be created now. A diversity of garden forms can be seen within the Zen Buddhist temple complex in Kyoto called Daitoko-ji. Set up in the early 14th century by Shuho Myocho or Daito Kukushi, this centre for the Rinzai school of Zen comprises 23 sub-temples operating today, even though Japanese people demonstrate less and less interest and involvement in Buddhist monastic rituals, say funeral rites. Significant among the spaces within the temple complex are tea gardens, graveyards, moss gardens, and pathways. Daitoku-ji is also home to some of the most intriguing kari-sansui gardens in the world, from the centuries-old gardens found in Daitoki's sub-temples of Daisen-in and Ryogen-in to the modern abstract spaces created by the Mirei Shigemori, one-time collaborator with Asami Noguchi in the mid-20th century. In Ryogen-in lies the so-called smallest rock garden in Japan, a Tsubo-niwa, a small enclosed garden, created by Gakushu Nabeshima in the 1950s. Named Totekiko, this garden, like its older and better-known Kari Sansui ancestor in nearby Ryoan-ji, can be seen as containing the entire cosmos in its small site. All the tensions, all the forces, all the important objects are reduced to the tight space of this enclosure. Many summaries of the garden claim that Totekiko represents a Zen adage about how the harder a stone is thrown in, the bigger the ripples. In this way, the carefully raked gravel represents a body of water, while the larger stones are the stone thrown into the gravel water. Observers also see the 5 large stones as islands in the sea, with waves lapping against them. 3 stones are on one end and 2 on the other, which also harkens back to the Chinese mythology of the 5 hours of the immortals. And then again, perhaps these are mountains, another vital component in Japanese mythology, emerging from a surrounding foggy landscape. More down to earth, as with the famous mother tiger and cubs interpretation of the stone garden at Ryoan-ji, the stones might be animals or humans crossing a stream, caught in the currents of life. Or it may be just an abstract but captivating arrangement of varieties of rock, between white and black, vertical and horizontal, one end and another, carrying out multiple yin and yang contrasts. Some scholars have even looked at kari sansui gardens like the famous Ryoan-ji through visual gestalt theories, suggesting that it is the empty spaces between the larger stones that become harmonizing and contain a subliminal meaning. As usual within religious symbolic structures, simple one-to-one correspondences give way to deeper realities, the ambiguous mysteries of myth, ritual, and symbol sensually absorbed. A stone's throw from my office, deep in Oneida County, New York, stands the Hamilton College Cemetery. Its current residents go back 2 centuries and include the founder of the college, a Presbyterian minister and missionary to the Oneida Indians named Samuel Kirkland, and the 18th century Oneida Indian chief who became Kirkland's friend and a Christian convert, Skenandoah. The stone monument at Skenandoah's gravesite reads, You have laid a permanent foundation for a great school, and you propose our children shall be benefited by it. Possibly you may find that the difference between us consists only in the colour of skin. Their graves are side by side, which by no means indicates that the relations between European whites and the native Oneida have always been cosy. Oneida is the anglicised name of Onyota Aka, pronounced Oniyoda Ake, which translates into English as People of the Standing Stone. Before Kirkland, French Jesuit missionaries were in contact with the Oneida, and a 1700 treaty with the French displays a signature of the Oneida nation simply as a drawing of a stone. In fact, a standing stone has continued to be at the physical and ceremonial heart of Oneida identity for hundreds of years. It is an oblong grey syenite boulder that has been an object of special veneration for as long as written history allows. According to several older sources, the stone was at the centre of harvest and New Year festivals, dances and general worship of the Great Spirit. The old stories told of how, whenever the Oneida people moved, the stone followed them. The Oneida stone caught the attention of the 19th century American geographer and ethnologist Henry Schoolcraft, who recorded a good deal of Native American mythology, and whose work would inspire Henry Wadsworth Longfellow to write his famed Hiawatha in 1855. Schoolcraft tells of the relations between the stone and the Oneida people as being indissolubly linked. The stone is spoken of in their traditions as if it were the palladium of their liberties, and the symbolical record of their very nationality. But as the Oneida were largely driven out of central New York, the stone was taken and moved in 1849 to the emerging urban centre of Utica and placed at Forest Hill, a cemetery on the edge of the city. As the Erie Canal remade prosperity for European immigrants across the northeastern United States, so rose the need to conquer land and bury people. In a curious account, somewhere between eulogy and triumph, is the Reverend George Hardy's report of the Oneida stone as it stood on a hill above Stockbridge, New York, just before it was taken to the cemetery. This was the resting place of the stone when the white man appeared in the land, and the red-skinned children of the Great Spirit began to give way before him. It saw its people themselves waste away at the stranger's presence, their council fires extinguished, their festal days unobserved, their sacrifices unoffered. As the stone was then moved to its cemetery site, Reverend Hardy's implication is that what is being buried is a whole people. The stone stood as a memorial witnessing to their lives. Today, after decades of change, the Oneida stone has been returned to the Oneida Nation and now stands at the entrance to the Shakopee Cultural Centre in Oneida, New York. The Oneida have rallied to preserve their land, their culture, and most important, an economic base that can retain their sense of power into the 21st century and to repurchase land on which their ancestors lived. Among other works, the Oneida have set up a casino resort, which now brings in millions of dollars in revenue. With this, they are working to preserve their heritage, history and language, in part by making generous donations to the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. 40 large uncarved stones called Grandfather Rocks surrounded the NMAI itself. They were blessed in an inaugural ceremony and now serve to ensure a safe journey and carry messages to future generations. The name the Oneida have taken for the casino metaphorically reflects both their past and their future. Turning Stone. When I was a child, my mother created a scrapbook of our family years before the multi-billion-dollar scrapbooking industry took hold. The book contained images, some hand-drawn and some photographic, and narrative bits and pieces of the stories of our family's life. As I remember it, the bound book with its needlework cover displaying the title Plate's Pile of Stones lay prominently on the coffee table of our living room. The book was a pile. The stories within were the stones. My ancestors drew much of their lived mythology from the Christian scriptures, and our family scrapbook's title was taken from an Old Testament passage. At the beginning of the story told in the book of Joshua, we learn that Moses had just died, having been denied entrance into the Promised Land because of his disobedient indiscretion when the people he was leading were thirsty. He had angrily struck a rock with his staff, which caused water to pour out. With the death of Moses, Joshua had become the leader and takes the Israelites across the Jordan River into the land of milk and honey. As they finish fording the boundary waters, marking the end of a long journey from slavery in Egypt and the beginning of a promised good life to come, God gives Joshua a few instructions. Take 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood, and carry them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight. God understands the permanence of a stone monument, its connection to a place lasting through time, and so God concludes the directives. When your children ask in time to come, "What do these stones mean to you?" then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off in front of the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the Israelites a memorial forever. An ancient pile of stones marks time and triggers stories, which is just what my family intended with their modern version. Something along these lines is enacted when stones are placed on grave markers in Jewish cemeteries. Decades later, when I visit my mother's house and read our family's pile of stones, I encounter a memorial and I remember the times of lost, whether lost lives or lost youth, and the times of gathering, whether weddings or reunions. In so doing, I learn again where I come from and ultimately the construction of who I am. One primary metaphor for my life has become the object, this pile of stones. Throughout history and across the world, stones and the stories they are witness to let us know where we have been, where we are going, and at last who we are. Stones stand, and they can stand in the same place for a long time. Wind and rain, sleet and snow cause erosion, and human hands wear them down even further, changing the colour and texture of the durable matter. Yet on a human time scale, stones seem virtually impermeable, imperceptibly changing in a lifetime. This fact makes them the ideal material to make special sacred spaces, memorials for generations to come. We find this in the gravestones of the old burial grounds in a New England village, as well as in a crowded Tokyo cemetery, in the Washington Monument and in the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., in the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin and the Pyramids of Egypt, in the Taj Mahal in Agra, India, as well as the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan outside Mexico City. Stone is globally pervasive as a medium for remembering what has come before, for re-encountering what no longer is. People feel connections with stones. They fondle them, touch them, kiss them, and tell stories by them. In a 1928 work, the poet Francis Ponge pondered the pebble. Ponge sees a long geological process evolving over time, as each and every pebble emerged from a single enormous ancestor, a cadaver that now has crumbled into pieces. We are left with smaller rocky chunks from that initial unity, the greatest of which are sown about under woods of time. There they crack, smile, and eventually become silent. Along the way, disintegration continues, and the rock fragments grow smaller and smaller. A boulder, stone, pebble, sand, smaller from day to day, but always sure of its form. While a great wind can uproot a tree but not move a pebble, the pebble itself eventually turns into sand and dust. Human time, distinct from the extensive unfolding of geological time, allows rocks, stones, pebbles and sand to appear immutable. Sometimes, as Ponge and William Blake and so many others have demonstrated, we get a glimpse inside the process, the eternity in a grain of sand, arrested in development and devolution. Through this glimpse we encounter the mortal-bound nature of all life. Ponge suggests the great wheel of stone seems to us practically immobile, and even theoretically we can only understand a part of the phase of its very slow disintegration. When the stone speaks and we hear, we realise the inevitability of its and our turn toward dust. Though lifespans differ, the stone and the human share this humble trait. Whatever other effects they produce, protection in travel, cosmic wanderings, links to the natural world, marking sacred space, grounding speech, sensual encounters with stones ultimately trigger the human encounter with mortality. Along the way, as we have seen in the preceding, stones just might be teaching us to speak a word or two. At least, if we're listening, they're telling us something about life itself, performing for us, whispering, standing up and down, killing, drawing us near or pushing us away, pointing here and there, reviving, ticking down the moments of eternity, allowing us to stand in awe and contemplation. And in so doing, they are acting religiously. Religions may tell us to take up stones and throw them at each other, but religious traditions also encourage us to stop, look and listen, to be aware of the nature of every existence, of our physical lives and dependence on earthly matter.